So I saw this video clip recently of this T-Rex versus lion, and I remember it from one of the Jurassic Park films. So I figured it'd be an interesting discussion or interesting video to show to present this idea. So we see this T-Rex storm into this lion's cage, and it's funny because the lion is in the zoo; it's not in its natural habitat. And the zoo is always a play on the idea of Constellation Zoo, where the hunters the weakling captures the strong one, right? So you have this dynamic already going on by the lion being inside of the zoo and the T-Rex is approaching it, right? So I see a lot of comments in the videos of the different videos that I've seen of this posted about who wins the fight or who won, right? And it's funny because people even think that the lion could go up against the T-Rex. It's almost like in their subconscious that they know it could, right? So I wanted to present who you think would win in this, right? And that's what this video is going to be about. Well, not really. The video is really going to just be about what's encoded when you see something like this. So when you see a lion versus a T-Rex, right, you should automatically know what's being presented, but most people don't. But it plays on their subconscious. That's why most people think the lion has a chance, right? And there's even been follow-up videos made on this, or follow-up literature from the company. There's even like a comic book about what happened to the lion, and they still never really answer what happened to the lion. And I'm gonna tell you the reason for that. The reason for that is because whenever you see a lion in films, you should know that the lion encodes the sun, Leo, and the other characters surrounding that character also represent different positions of the sun, or even the sky, or the stars, or the constellations. So when you see a giant dinosaur go up against a lion, and the lion even has the high ground, you're looking at Leo versus the moon. Dinosaurs always encode the moon. And I can present this in a separate video, but in order for you to understand where this is going, just consider that dinosaurs encode the moon. And I'll show you this different dynamic through a lot of different stories, just so you can see what's really being presented here, right? And they also say at this time, life will find a way, right? Because it's a circular dance where the sun and the moon will either battle each other, work with each other. But in this case, it's a battle, it's a rivalry. And you have the dinosaur, which is a play on the Titan, right? So it's not just a normal moon. It's not like a blood moon or like a witch or anything like that. That might represent something like that. You're looking at a supermoon. And this is also seen in other stories. The most recent story that shocked the world was the story of Thanos versus Anthony Stark, or a tiny star. And that's that same idea, but this is being presented in just a different symbolism. But you have the lion versus the giant dinosaur. So let's break this down some. So whenever you see a character who's a lion, you should be thinking about the sun, right? And a lot of people, this idea can go over their heads, but I mean, it's obvious. If you've seen the movie The Lion King and you've seen how much symbolism is in there, it's about the sun. The characters are just personifying the story of the sun or the sky. So you have Simba the lion, and then you have all these different elements or different things going on around him. And you even see in that movie that there's a supermoon playing, right? Or a supermoon involved, where he kind of changes his idea of where to go back. And right after that supermoon, he mates, and then has, he doesn't have a child in the film, but he mates, right? Which usually is done under the supermoon or the honeymoon in the summer. And then he also has a dream, or talks to his father through the dream world almost immediately after. And that's not by coincidence. That's actually based off of the idea of the sun and the moon, right? So then we have, the sun also represented in myths like Hercules, right? And if you know anything about myths are actually just retellings of nature. They're just copying off of what people observed in the sky, and they just made stories based off of it, and those stories get passed down. And before you know it, people are believing the story over and over like it's real, and they can't even see that it was really just about the sky. And then you have stories like Hercules presented, and it gets retold, reshuffled, even referenced in other things, right? To give you an example of this, right? The most recent issue that we've had, the coronavirus, is based off of the idea of a constellation called the Hercules Corona Borealis, right? And you'll see a lot of films even referencing a Hercules virus. The James Bond movie referenced it. I believe Terminator 3, The Rise of the Machines, one of the dog's names was Hercules, and he had pneumonia. And this concept goes on and on because it's a reference to to the crown, or to the sun being covered by the moon. And that's where we get the idea of corona, the eclipse, or vice versa, the moon being covered by the sun. But you also see it in the I Am Legend film. They show lions several times throughout the movie, and I think it's the last shot on the uncut version. The last shot is of a lion, and it's because of that. It's because it's letting you know that this is the sun virus, right? And rightfully so, that film is about these vampire-like zombies, right? But we even see stories of lions in the Bible. We see the biblical story involving, biblical stories involving the lion, like the Samson story, where he, with his bare hand, defeats a lion. And then we also have the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And if you look at all encodings of these stories, or if you know what the stories are really presenting, it's about the idea of the sun. And you see in a lot of these pictures or artist renditions of the sun being presented, or the sun being playing a heavy part in these stories, right? And then this also goes on even in myths, a lot of other myths, as mentioned before with Hercules. But if you look at the this Egyptian, the Sphinx, right? The idea of what's on here, what's being shown, most people don't know that it's encoding the sky also, right? You have the Egyptian pyramids right behind it, and we know that the sun at certain points and the moon or at certain points go to the top or the tip of the pyramid, right? But right below it is the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is an idea of Leo, the lion, and I'm not sure if they changed the head or something happened to it, but you're seeing Leo, the lion, down here, and then the sun and the moon rising over top of the pyramid right above it. It's a play on the idea of the moon and the sun, and each of them battling for the sky. So you can imagine when the moon's at the top of the pyramid, a supermoon, and you have Leo down here, you can imagine what kind of stories being told by looking at these so-called alive, like monuments or architecture, you know? And you see this kind of same concept in other things as well. I believe there was a boxer named Leonard Spinks, and it's not by coincidence, or Leon Spinks. It's all because of the same idea, right? And if you, I'm not really a boxing fan, I'll say, but I grew up in a household where we watched a lot of boxing. My dad was into it, and a lot of the characters on there, a lot of the different combinations of boxers will always be kind of like sun and moon. And you see this even in the movies and the films. You have Rocky versus Apollo. Rocky is a play on the hard rocky moon, right? And versus Apollo. And this concept goes on and on. Like Little Mac in Punch Out is a play on a small moon versus a giant sun, Mike Tyson. And this concept goes on and on especially with the big fights. It'll usually be something about sun and moon. And I can demonstrate that maybe in a separate video. But I think that's an important point to know, that a lot of these big bouts, even in wrestling, are associated with the moon versus sun. Just think about like someone like Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan, who has the wild hair like Leo the Lion, versus Andre the Giant, right? And the same thing with like Dwayne Rock Johnson. These concepts go on and on. But to further demonstrate that, you know, the sun is represented by the lion in a different symbolism, I'll break down some TV shows and some movies later on in the video. But let's go over why the moon encodes dinosaurs are encoding the moon. So whenever you hear about stories about dinosaurs, always look, especially even the fictional ones. It's almost like whoever publishes books or publishes movies and films always has to put a reference into it, even though the original writer may not have no idea of why these suggestions were made for them to add. When you look at all the things that are surrounding dinosaurs, it always points to the moon. You have, you know, the giant asteroid that came from the sky, or the giant rock, right? Which is a play on the moon. But if you think about the word dino and breaking it down, and just look at a lot of the symbolism involved with how even dinosaurs open their mouth to bite. You know, other animals don't need to open this much just to bite something that's way smaller than them. But every time the T-Rex is biting, he opens his full mouth, almost to make like a full moon crescent. And that's not by coincidence. It's encoded that this characters, or the idea of a dinosaur, represents the moon. And then also the idea of them being titans. It's a play on the Supermoon story. I want you to think, if all texts and all movies and religious stories and all come from people repeating or encoding what they're watching in the sky, just think about where the idea of dinosaurs probably came from. There's probably was someone watching a supermoon, and boom, right there in that supermoon, they saw that they leveraged the idea of let's use this supermoon to tell some of the biggest stories or stories involving the biggest or gigantic creatures, and dinosaurs came along. And this goes on and on. Have you have these Chinese dragons, I mean these Chinese lions who are, there's no native lions to China, so why do they have these lions in their festivals or in their myths and all, right? Because it has to do with the sky. The whole world at some point just encodes the different animals in the sky, and there probably was an age where the lion was fully recognized as the lead. So the whole world encoded it in their literature and all. And this is where you have the idea of lions even being involved with Chinese festivals and culture when it has nothing to do with the country. So in the film 300, we have this character named Leonidas, which is a play on Leo, right? And I forget what he had to face as a child, but I know he had to go face some kind of cat in the wild as a very young boy by himself, right? Almost kind of like establishing who the king of the wild is, you know. But his name is Leonidas. Is not by coincidence. It's a play on him being a character that's embodying or playing the sun. And then the rival in this film is a character named Xerxes, right? And Xerxes is play on like a giant type character. You can see that he's way taller, like an exaggerated way taller than the main character. And that's to let you know that this character is an embodiment of the moon, right? And, you know, just think about, you know, Leonidas and them are all about natural things, you know, where this new kingdom or the kingdom that's trying to impose and take over Sparta is kind of moon based. They're all about jewels and gifts and money and just things that are different in the way of life the Spartans have, you know. And there's an offer made, and he refuses to offer. But before you know it, they end up fighting and all. But it's the same idea. You have the lion encoded in Leonidas versus the moon encoded in the giant or the titan Xerxes. And now, similarly, we have the same kind of idea in the story of Game of Thrones. We have, you know, the House of Lannister, which their symbol is the lion, right? And we have Jaime Lannister, who has the lion armor on him, and they are against the Dragon Kingdom. And the Dragon Kingdom is, it seems like, might be the only kingdom that actually has real like titans on this in this world. They have like these gigantic dragons, right? It's not a coincidence. That's actually to let you know. But they do a unique thing in this show where they mix it up, where the Lion Kingdom has bad elements in it, and then the Dragon Kingdom is kind of, you know, the good guy, but it's kind of like an inverse of the ideas where you don't know who the good guy is or the bad guy is, or some teams have good guys and bad guys on it. And what's interesting is, not by coincidence, these are all the same kind of stories just being encoded. In 300, you have the hunchback Sparta or the deformed Sparta backstab the group, right? And you know, go to assist the moon characters, right? And then in this Game of Thrones, you have the same kind of character where you have the the dwarf or youngest brother of the Lion Kingdom go to the moon character or to the Dragon Kingdom to help them out. I can go on and on with Game of Thrones and how the characters are encoded in the sun or mimicking religious or myths, and all that really points back to the sky. You know, just think about the character who plays Sansa Stark. You know, and the word Sansa is a play on sun, where there's the idea that there might be a second sun that we don't see. And you can see this in a lot of characters, but that's what her character represents. And just think about who she is in this series, and then that same actress is also the same actress who's playing Phoenix, and then Dark Phoenix, and it goes on and on. And there's a lot of parallels with other stories that you'll see with Game of Thrones. Just think about the recent Doctor Strange film with the Scarlet Witch, and then look at the Scarlet Witch character in Game of Thrones, and you can see a lot of the parallels because they're all really telling the same stories of the sky. But to end on to finish up, wrap up Game of Thrones, just consider there's a character in here named Lyanna or Mormont, right? And it's a play on both words, the lion, where you have Lyanna, which is a play on Leo, right? And then Mormont is a play on the moon. Anytime you hear Mort, like as in morgue or as in multiplying, which happens underneath of a honeymoon, it's a play on the idea of a moon. So you have a character who's representing both of those. And sure enough, as soon as I saw her name, I knew she was going to be fighting a giant. And I just looked her up, and of course, she killed a giant in one episode. And it's not by coincidence; it's because these characters encode the sky. And pay attention to how she killed that giant. She poked it in its eye, and I will actually make a video on giants and how they're all encoded with the moon, and how almost in every story, no matter what's being told, you'll see them die about several different ways that they can die, because it's all a play on how to kill the moon. Leonardo, you have the Technodrome, which is like a moon-shaped thing with this giant eye. Then you have Krang, who goes from small to big, and Krang's design is a play on the Kraken from the Wrath of the Titan story, which is the moon-based story. And these things go on and on, because they're all really just encoding the activity of the moon, where it goes from small to big in different phases. And then you have Optimus Prime, who one of his forms is Leo the Lion form, and he's the leader. So of course, he would have a Leo the Lion form. He's even shown in front of the Sphinx a lot in the movies. He even has a battle where, for the first time in one of the films, they have like a giant robot that climbs to the top of the pyramid, and Optimus, I believe, is the one that shoots him down. And that's because it's like Leo the Lion versus the Supermoon trying to get to the top of the pyramid. And this concept goes on and on. He tames the Dinobots, which are moon-based transformers. And the main Dinobot's named Grim, as in the moon, and Grimlock. And Optimus is able to tame him and to get him to be under his control and use him. And these are where these concepts come from. You have Voltron, where you have a bunch of the lions, like 5 different lions that all form this one giant Titan robot. So it's an inverse of the idea, where they combine the best of like both worlds to form a different kind of story, but it's kind of like a spin-off on it, And then you have in one of the most recent Mario games, there's like a stage where it gets dark and there's no light, and Koopa turns into this giant, dinosaur breathing dragon, and Mario, the power up is him to get Leo the Lion suit, and he faces him. In one of the Resident Evil games, it might be the first game that has giants in it, you have the main character named Leo, or Leon, and it's not by coincidence. These are all telling or encoding the story of the sky. And I think Leon is assistant or paired with a lady named Claire. And a lot of times in giant films, you'll see a character named Claire, and Claire means light, and if you have Sinclair, it means without light. And this kind of Sinclair idea is seen in a lot of dinosaur films. In the old TV show Dinosaurs, there was a Sinclair. In the Rampage film with the giants, there's a lady named Claire. There's another lady in one of the most recent Jurassic Park films named Claire. And it goes on and on, because it's really about the light, about the moon and the sun in this kind of story. And then you have Van Damme playing Lionheart against a giant, or a bootleg Andre the Giant character in this film, but it's the same idea here, just encoding the sky. Then you have Rush Hour, you have Lee and Carter, and Lee is a play on the Leo the Lion idea. Look at the colors that Carter's wearing against this giant. And, that's not by coincidence. They're encoding these stories. You have Bruce Lee, who's kind of a play on the same idea. He's challenging a giant here. And you kind of see the different colors you should know what's being presented, right? And then, look at the for no reason pictures that he took. These are the crossings of the moon and the sun. And then you have, just think about the idea of like a character like Liu Kang, who's like based off of like a Bruce Lee, right? It kind of has like a Leo sound in it, but then it also has the king in it, right? So, you kind of hear like Liu Kang or Leo Kang, right? But he also encodes the dragon. And you see this in a lot of characters like Ryu versus Sagat. And Ryu is kind of rivals or has an affinity to Akuma, who's like Leo the Lion character. So these are all just hiding the same stories or presenting it. You have Leo from Big Bang and his girlfriend's Penny, which is a play on the moon. And then Sheldon, which is a play on Don. Don is always related to the moon. And notice Sheldon's way taller than all of them. He gets hit in the face a lot. And you see this in a lot of moon-based characters or giants. They get hit in the face or the eye or a black eye. So you see that. There's so many different ways for them to say Leo. They say Lenny Kravitz. Snoop Dogg was even recently promoted or changed to Snoop Lion. And these are the same kind of concepts going on. And, remember, characters' positions in shows, they might change. Like when they do a reboot, it may be a completely different element or a different encoding they're using. But, we see this kind of idea in Beauty and the Beast, where one presentation, it's like a Taurus or a giant, like beast-like animal or bear-like animal. And then another one is more like a lion. And it's because of the story it's telling in that episode or that series or rendition of it. We even have a show like called Thundercats where the main character is Leo or Lionel, and he, of course, in the show there's a bunch of giants, and this idea goes on and on. You have Bruce Leroy, which is also the play on that kind of on the Leo the Lion idea. And it's funny because in the word, dinosaurs comes from an old myth about a character named Sauron. And you can even see this idea in Lord of the Rings. If you look at the eye of the Sauron on top of the tower, you'll see that same eyeball inside of a dinosaur from Jurassic Park films. They're literally just encoding that this is what this story represents. And you think about what the word Sauron has, it has the word Ron in it, which always means moon. Like Ronald McDonald, all these things always point back to the moon. But there's an X-Men character, I think his name is Kazar, and he has a little tiger with him. And a lot of times you'll see a tiger with the character because they don't want to make it so obvious, because the man is actually representing Leo the lion, so they'll just pair him with a tiger. An example of this would be like something like He-Man, where he's the leader, he's the Leo the lion character, but instead of just making it obvious by having a pet tiger, he has a pet lion, he has a pet tiger. And the same kind of idea is seen in this character Kazar, and of course he's battling, his jungle is affected by this character named Sauron, who's possessing people. And even there's a TV show that was out called Empire. Just think about what the word empire means. It means like kingship or ruling, right? And it had this character named Lucius Lion, and all of his different kids' last names were Lion, and they would always emphasize the Lucius Lion or the lion in the name. But his girlfriend or wife was named Cookie, right? And Cookie's a play on the moon. Just think about the moon and a bunch of craters in it, or a bunch of chips in it. And a lot of times you'll hear the moon referred to as Cookie. But it's funny because there's a character in the show named Shine that Lucius shoots, and it's kind of like the same idea of, what happened with Bad Boy Records. There's a character named Shine, and he goes to jail, where all the other characters at Bad Boy are moon-based characters like Craig Mack and Big Mac or Biggie Smalls, and they all are killed in real life. But to sum this, video up, just whenever you see the lion, you should know that it encodes a story about the sun. And depending on what other characters are in it, I would be looking for something very tiny where the lion's gigantic and then the other character is small. And then that's the idea. It's kind of like inversing the idea. But then if you see a story where the lion is small and then the threat is gigantic, it's a story in which Supermoon is versus a lion, So just look out for these things and consider, with everything that was just presented in this video, just consider what may really be communicated with the story of Titanic. You have Leo the lion or Jack Dawson versus a super ship, right? And we know the real life story and even the film encodes the moon. So you can kind of see what's being presented with those ideas. And another one to consider is the story of GaliLEO or Leo. Consider that this person might not even be a real man, and his work on the moons specifically the moons of Jupiter, Saturn, and Titan, the biggest moons, and the work he's done and what's encoded in that message. Or he had the name GaliLEO, looking up to do work and discover things about the moon and how our world works. And there's even this high school in San Francisco called GaliLEO Academy or GaliLEO High School, and their mascot is the lion, and of course their football team is the lion. And it's a predominantly Asian school, but they have a lion dance also that they do at their school. That's like one of their school rituals. But then a lot of the combinations they have in the teams that they play, one of the teams' names is Hercules or the Titans from Hercules, California. And that's not by coincidence. These teams are aligned and paired up. And then you have O.J. Simpson. He used to I think he used to go to that high school. He ends up growing up to play for the Lions. So he played for the Lions in high school and then in NFL. And one could guess if this character is a person who was placed. I mean, we have these combinations seen over and over. We have the Tennessee Titans battling the Lions, or the Giants battling the Lions. And on a side note, just pay attention to the Titan symbol. The word Titan, remember, always points back to the moon. And then you have 3 stars surrounding it. And now you know why there's 3 people who had to fight Thanos to end it. You had Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor surrounding Thanos for the final blow or the final fight. And these kind of combinations go on and on. You have Lionel Messi, the famous soccer player, fighting or battling against a giant robot on TV in a soccer game. And it's not by coincidence. I remember when they presented it, it was highlighted that he was battling a giant for that reason. And a lot of his marketing, you'll see sometimes he's a giant or the ball's giant or his opponents are a giant against him. So I would, in closing, I kind of just want to, to reinforce the idea that you should be, whenever you hear about a character whose name is Lionel or something along that lines of lion, you should be looking to see if the story that's being told in that case is pairing that character with something titanic or gigantic or super, or like even a giant. Just think about the Wizard of Oz. You have the lion next to the Tin Man, which is a play on the Titanium Man, right? Then you have New York Giants. It's surrounded with characters on their roster named Lionel, or throughout the years, there's always been a Lionel or lion character working with the Giants. And this kind of concept goes on and on. So, in summary, this video was just to demonstrate to you what's encoded when you're seeing the lion in TV shows, games, or movies, and even books. And then also, the comparison or the contrast that's often used in lion stories where the lion will be battling something super or giant, and that character always represents the moon. It just comes down to that. This is a story that is telling you about the sun versus the moon. And sometimes the characters will take the best of both worlds. But what's encoded at the root of it is the sun and the moon.